My name is Kevin Winters, and I want to welcome everybody to my channel. If you are a first-time viewer, I really appreciate you stopping by and giving me an opportunity to share the word of the Lord into your life. And if you are my regulars, I really appreciate you sticking with me and hanging in there with me. And welcome back. And if you've been following this channel, we have been in a series called The Keys of Restoration. The Keys of Restoration, or the keys to being healed. Now, I want us to understand that I'm not talking about physical healing, right? I've talked a lot about physical healing, how to get healed, the things you need to prepare to be healed. And I want to talk to us about being healed in other ways, because sometimes people are broken in their careers. Sometimes people have broken businesses. America is right now is experiencing a period of brokenness, and brokenness in relationships, and brokenness within our own selves. So how do we get healed from that stuff? How does God help to heal us? And so what we've been doing is looking at Naaman's story in 2 Kings 5 as an example or an illustration of somebody who has a problem in his life that he's able to be healed from. And so I want us to look at the process that he goes through. And so last week we looked at the fact that part of his process and part of his journey was that he had to have the first key in his life. He had to have the key of acceptance. So the question is, what in the world is Naaman accepting, and what are we accepting? And to understand that, we have to look at the story of Naaman by looking at the condition that he has called leprosy. Again, I said this in the first video and probably the second video, but leprosy is a very serious condition. In the ancient world, was such a terrible condition that you had to be isolated from people. So it was a terrible skin condition that had varying degrees of how it affected people. But it had the potential to have the infected area become so infected and so bad off that it actually rot and fall off the body. Now, this may not mean anything or seem significant unless you look at Naaman's resume. Naaman, it starts off by telling us that he was a great and mighty man, that he had favor with the king, that by his hand God had delivered all of delivered the nation of Israel into his hand. And it tells us all these awesome things, only to come behind it by telling us that he was a leper. And so the first thing we said is that we had to accept the but in his story. He had to accept that there was a but in his story. And we said this about that but, that if he's going to accept that but in his story, that he had to see that as a but in his story and not an even though. But is a contraction, and but allows us to make comparisons. But in making comparison between two things, it also allows us to discredit the first thing and gives more weight to the second thing. It's kind of like somebody saying, I know I offended you, but you hurt my feelings first. What they're saying is, and this is why we become so offended is, and why the apology is really not accepted, it's because you know that the word but discredits their role in the conflict and discredits what they did to elevate their own feelings on their side of the but. But even though it's not that way, even though allows us to make level comparisons so that, for instance, you can be a multi millionaire, successful CEO of a corporation, and you can still say, I'm able to do this even though I'm involved in illegal activity, or even though I have not always crossed my I's or dotted my T's. You see people use even though as a form of justification. And so the first way for Naaman to be healed is he has to have the right perspective of this situation. He has to be able to say that this is a but in his story, not an even though. And then we said this. We said that if he's going to be healed, he has to be able to accept that there is comprehend the broadness or the broadness of the impact of the issue in the lives of other people. So we looked at his story, and again, I showed you that there are a range of people affected by Naaman's issue. The verse 1 tells us that it's his issue. And it seems okay to a lot of us that we have a struggle with an issue, and we see it as our issue because we're unwilling to deal with it. And we see it as an even though because we don't really understand how our issues or our struggles or our battles with various things impact the lives of everybody around us. And so we looked at how Naaman a struggle was affecting his family, and how his struggle affected his country, and how his struggle affected not only his country, but how his struggle impacted his relationship with another country, right? And so we looked at how broad Naaman's issue was. And then we looked at the fact that he had to see the but right because it was a threat to his future. Because again, leprosy can cause wherever the affected area is from the body to literally fall off. And what is a warrior if his hand falls off, or if his foot falls off, or if it's on his leg and he can no longer go to battle? And so we looked at all of those things last week and said the first thing that Naaman had to do to be healed, to be restored, is he had to deal with the first but. And I encouraged all of you, and I still encourage you, that you have to deal with that first but. But last week I also said that there is a second but. And I think it's important that we look at that. So if you go to 2 Kings 11, let's look at the second but. It says, but Naaman became furious. This is the second but in the story, right? This is the second but in the story. We don't have the context to it yet, but I want you to understand that this but is a very significant but in the story. Because in order to grasp the fullness of this one, we have to look at what leads up to this moment. So let's start reading at verse 9. It says, then Naaman went with his horses and chariots, and he stood at the door of Elijah's house. And Elijah sent a messenger to him, saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored or healed to you, and you shall be clean. But Naaman became furious and went away and said, indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and heal the leprosy. Verse 11 again, but Naaman became furious. There is that second but in the story. It is the second but, and it is the biggest but in the story. Because as you can see, and as I showed you last week, that before Naaman gets to verse 14, where he is restored and where he is healed and where his skin is recovered, he has to deal with the first but then he has to deal with the second but. And I want us to understand that the second but is the biggest but in the story, and it is the most dangerous but in the story, and it is the most dangerous but in your story as well. Why? Let's read it one more time. But then Naaman became furious. This is what happened when he had that second but. It says, and he went away. And he went away. So I want you to understand what's happening. Naaman has gone through a lot of drama to get rid of something that is threatening his future, that is impacting the lives of everybody in his world, that is causing problems in his career. So much so that the king thought, and everybody else thought, we got to get rid of it. So here he has come to the verse 14 of his life, the place of healing. He gets some instructions from the prophet Elijah that would save his life, that would save his career, that would save his reputation, that would preserve him so that God could continue to use him. And he walks away. That is the danger of the second but. Now we have to ask the question, why did he walk away? Let's read verse 11 to see why he walked away. Let's read it again. But Naaman became furious and went away and said, indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place of the leprosy. Why did Naaman walk away? He walked away because he heard two voices. He walked away because he heard two voices. There was the voice of God that told him how to be healed. And then there was the voice in his heart, his own personal recommendation on how he should be healed. There was the voice of God, and then there was his voice. Now, this is important because when I talk about conflict and I talk about being healed and healing the conflicts in our life, the conflicts, and I want y'all to understand you can have conflicts in a number of ways. When I talk about healing the conflicts in your life, I'm ultimately trying to get you to see why can't you take the next step? Why can't you go the extra mile? What makes a person come all the way to the door of opportunity? What makes a person not go the extra mile and save their marriage? What makes a person make terrible business decisions and throw away great business opportunities? What makes a nation not take advantage of a moment to be healed? You know what makes that happen? The fact that there are always going to be two voices. There's always going to be the voice of God, and there's always going to be our own voice. And let me tell you what conflict has a good way of doing. It has a good way of pulling those voices to the surface. And that's essentially what happens with Naaman. Naaman is the victim of a heart voice. He's the victim of a heart voice. So what are the heart voices? In Naaman's story, the heart voice was pride. Pride kept him from getting healed immediately. But here's some other kinds of heart voices or motives behind heart voices. There can be the voice of pride. And the voice of pride says exactly what he said. Well, I thought he would have done it this way. This is how I think he should do it. The voice of jealousy says, well, why does he get to tell me how it should be healed? Maybe I want to be healed like so and so was healed. So and so was healed. Unforgiveness has a voice, and unforgiveness says they wounded me. There's no way I'm going to take a healing from that person. There's no way I'm going to let that black man help me. There's no way I'm going to let that white woman help me. Unforgiveness. Envy has a voice. Envy has a voice. Envy makes you want what other people got. Covetousness has a voice. Insecurity has a voice. I'm not good enough for this healing. Oh, I'm not good enough to stand before this man of God. Oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'll never be enough. I know that they want to offer me the job, but I'm not really that good of a person. I'm not really that great at. Fear has a voice. Fear has a voice. Oh, I'm so scared. What if I go down in the water and I drown? What if everybody sees me? There are voices, inner voices that come out of us when we get to the moment of conflict. Conflict will show us about those other voices. This is important because Naaman doesn't get healed because he has a voice of pride and anger that is talking him out of doing what God has given as an instruction for his healing. And I want you to stop and think, is there any other voice that's keeping you, America, from getting rid of COVID-19? Is there any other voice that's keeping you from being healed in your business or being healed in your career or being healed in your marriage? What is stopping you from taking advantage of your moment of healing? What is stopping you from doing what God has told you to do? What are you saying to yourself? If you want to find the genuine part of yourself, you have to pay attention to what you say to yourself. So let's go to Proverbs 23:7. This is a verse we see often. We hear this often. It says, "For as a man thinks in his heart, so is he." Most of us have been taught to believe that this passage is telling us that if we continue to think a certain way, we're going to become a product of our thinking. Right? We're going to become a product of our thinking if we continue to think a certain way. I want you to understand that while there are passages that better suggest that or more clear about that, this is not that passage. Really what this passage does is this passage tells us if we want to find out who we really are, if you want to know who a man really is, you got to get down to his thinking. So it's not that he's going to become a product of his thinking, but that he is the product of his thinking. He is the product of his thinking. And let me show you the rest of that verse. We like to stop at that verse. We stop at the first half of it. If you read the whole verse, you see what God is really trying to tell us. It says, "For as a man thinks in his heart, so is he." Then it says this, Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. In other words, he's doing something externally. We see the smile on his face, and we see the seemingly happiness in his business ventures, and we see a lot of kumbaya and a lot of singing. But if you really want to know what he thinks about you, if we really want to know the truth, you got to find out what he's thinking. That's why God doesn't look at the outer appearance. God looks at the heart. And so you have to understand that the heart has a voice. And the ultimate goal of getting you to your healing means God has to cause you to confront that voice. What happens when you have a conflict with a white person? What do you say to yourself? What happens when an African American or a black person does something and you don't agree with it? What do you say to yourself? What happens when you are at the door of a business venture? Are you saying fearful things to yourself? Are you saying scary things to yourself? What are you saying to yourself? Naaman can't be healed as long as he is competing or allowing his heart or allowing his ideas to compete with God's agenda. I want that to settle in on you. And let me tell you why it's so important for y'all to get this particular point, to deal with this particular but. The danger of this particular voice is two things. One, it negates all of the people who are involved in helping you be everything that you want to be. Look at what it costs to get Naaman to this moment. The slave girl stepped out of line to make a suggestion to her master. Could have possibly cost her her life, especially if he didn't get healed. The king gave resources to pay for his healing. The king of Israel was agitated by the request and fearful of a war. Elijah was called upon to do ministry from the comfort of his home. The servants, who we find later challenged his thinking, took the risk of challenging their master on his decision. Look at all of the people who are inconvenienced. And Naaman has the audacity to say no. I want you to think about all the people who put their houses up for you, or took time away from their families to take you to your meetings, or paid your rent, or drove you around to interviews and to doctor appointments, and watched your kids while you worked the second shift, and sat with you in the wee hours of the morning listening and ministering to you, and those who called their friends to help you get jobs, those who stuck their neck out on the line to see you win. How dare you walk away? How dare you walk away because of something that you're saying to yourself? That's one of the drawbacks is when you don't go after that opportunity, you discount all of the hard work people have put in to get you to this moment. The second part of it is the second voice will overshadow the voice of God in your life. Again, Naaman heard two voices. It was the voice of God, and it was his heart voice. And I want you to understand that, because the danger of heart voices, I have to talk about the voice of God, is that it can block the voice of God, and it can be quite irrational. So let's talk about the irrationality of it. Naaman reasoned about God's instructions for his healing, and they weren't even justifiable. They weren't realistic. He said, wait a minute, isn't the water over there better than this water? Why I got to go in that water? Why can't I use this water? If God is going to heal you by water, does it matter which water? See, it's not logical. Yes, the Jordan was a very dirty river. It was a dirty, muddy river. But Naaman doesn't have the details. He doesn't know if it's ingredients within the mud that God is using to heal. He doesn't know how God is using this moment to heal him. It's completely irrational for him to say to himself, he has a better idea than God's. It blocks you from being able to receive. It can block you from being able to receive the voice of God. One of the things I try to desperately get through to everybody that would dare listen to me, God, hearing the voice of God is not the problem. Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice. Hearing the voice of God is not a problem. I don't believe in teaching people how to hear the voice of God. I teach you how to recognize the voice of God, and then I teach you how to receive it. First, I got to teach you how to discern. How do you know the difference between your voice, Satan's voice, God's voice? And then after you can actually know which voice you're listening to, the next step is you have to actually receive it. I want you to look at something. Look at what James says. James 1:5-8. It says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all of his ways. I want you to understand what this verse is saying, because so many times we've taken this verse and interpreted it improperly. God starts off by saying, if you are confused about what's happening in your life and you need direction and you need instruction, he says, all you have to do is ask. Then he says this is the key though. You got to ask, not doubting anything. And he says, if not, you're not going to receive. So people have interpreted that as God will not speak to doubtful people. But that's not what it says. It starts off by saying he gives liberally and without reproach. He holds nothing against you when you ask. So the question is, what does he mean? What does God mean when he says, let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord, for he is a double-minded man, unstable. What does it mean when it say he will not receive? Naaman teaches us what God is talking about. His story is an example of how we fail to receive God's voice. So Naaman has a problem. He has been offered a solution. He's been offered a solution. It's been given to him freely, without reproach. Doesn't hold the fact that they God doesn't hold it against him that they raided Israel. Doesn't hold it against him that he has an Israeli slave girl. Freely gives liberally and without reproach. He's given Naaman instructions. It's not about whether God gave him instructions. Naaman would not receive God's instruction. The same thing happens with most of y'all. It ain't that God isn't talking to you. It isn't God hasn't told you what to do. It's not that God hasn't told America how to heal. It's that we don't want to receive that instruction because we have a voice that's telling us there's another way of doing it. Another voice that's talking us out of it. And that's why the latter half of James' verse says, he is a double-minded man. The word doubt means double-minded. The word doubt means this. It means to have two minds or two perspectives, to be caught between two ideas. The only thing stopping you from being healed is you have another idea. See, y'all thought doubt just meant not believing God. But every single place where people struggled to do what God wanted them to do, every single place in the scripture, go search it for yourself. Every single place, there exists two ideas. God's idea and somebody else's idea. As long as we think that we can do it the way we want to do it, we're going to struggle. You know what the biggest problem is with America, and it's not being able to get rid of COVID-19? You want me to give y'all insight into why you can't get rid of it? Because America has a pride voice that's talking louder than God's instructions to tell us how we can get rid of it. Y'all have to stop listening to the voice of your heart over God's instructions. I told you the first thing is to identify where God is, identify his voice. Y'all think that God doesn't see the situation happening in the countries around the world, that he doesn't care, that he hasn't spoken? Of course God has spoken. Of course God has instructions for how to heal. Of course God's released the answer on how to heal. The question is, what are you saying to yourself, America? What are you saying to yourself as individuals in America or in other places? What are you saying to yourself that is overshadowing his instructions so that you won't go and do the thing that he told you to do so that you can be healed? Competing voices. The second but in Naaman's story is the worst but in his story, because it's the but that allowed a man to travel a distance to get something that he really wanted and then to walk away from it. It's the most dangerous but in the story. It's the most dangerous but in your story. And what I want y'all to do is I want you to pay attention. This is the easy part, y'all, about hearing God's voice. God's voice is always the first voice. When you have two voices, God's voice is always the first voice. I need y'all to understand that. Adam and Eve, they're in the garden. God gave them instructions. Satan came to subvert God's instructions. Jesus has instructions. He gets on the mountain. Satan's offering him a new idea. If you are the Son of God. Abraham, God has told him what to do. The first time, his wife offers him a second idea. Doubt is the result of Satan coming in behind God and offering an alternative to his instructions. Do what he told you to do. Once you identify his voice, then do that. And don't allow another voice to subvert the voice of God in your life so that you don't do what you need to do to be healed from that thing. Listen, from that thing that is destroying your family, harming your nation, putting people at the brink of war. Threatening your future. Don't let the other voice, the voice that sounds like reason, the voice that sounds like conspiracies, don't let those voices rob you of the moment to get rid of the thing that allows you to be great.